So, functional testing. Testing in general. If we don't do testing, we typically end up in this kind of situation. We fix some bug, and it goes a little while, and the same bug turns up again because no one really made sure that another guy wouldn't make the same mistake. So we do want to get into some testing at least. And typically, our testing scenario looks something like this, where in the bottom we have a lot of unit tests. Then we do some integration tests, trying to build the components, make them talk together. And then we do a few functional tests in the top. And, well, that's good and that's bad. So when it comes to testing, unit tests, they're extremely fast to run. They run in isolation, they're fast to write, and they're good for nitty-gritty logic on a method basis. But when it comes to complexity, it rises to the top when we get up in this pyramid, and that's why we prefer unit tests, because they are so easy to write. But when it comes to confidence in how do our application actually work, and does it actually work once we have it deployed and up and running, a unit test doesn't really say much. Whereas a functional test, where we run the application, use a browser, interact with it like a real user, it actually builds up our confidence that our application will work. So when it comes to unit testing, this is an example on why unit test says everything is working perfectly, because each component works perfectly. But once you combine them, it might be that we need to have some tweaking. And that's where integration and especially functional testing comes in. So in functional testing, we ignore the specifics of the underlying software. We pretty much don't care if it's a Ruby on Rails, a Grails, a Ratpack, whatever application, whatever code it's written in. What we want to do is consider it a black box, or to a certain extent a gray box, where we might go under the hood, try to tweak a little bit. We don't want to send out emails to our entire catalog of users, so we might want to tweak that to just use a fake test server. But in general, consider it the entire application. And for web applications, which is the field that at least I'm working in, and I assume most of you are working in, that the best way of doing this is spinning up a browser, make sure things work. So I don't know how you structured your teams. A lot of teams have dedicated testers. I have worked with dedicated testers. They are excellent people. They find all the nitty-gritty stuff that I missed in my code. Hopefully not that often, because I do testing. When it comes to browser automation, I really like to have it as automated as possible so we can reuse. Every time I make a change, I want to make sure that it doesn't break anything. And some of the testers I've worked with, they're into, oh, but then I'll just click through everything and make sure. And I'm like, yeah, but every time I do some work, you got a lot of work to do. And once the situation progresses, our software becomes more complex, the suite that a tester would have to test every time I do something just grows immensely large. That's why we do browser automation. This should be automated, this should be programmed. I have seen testers do programming, and it looks something like this. So on the teams I worked in, I usually discuss with the testers that they should make the scenarios. What do we want to test? And then I can implement the tests. And using GEB, the test is actually implemented in a way that makes them so readable that even the testers agree. Okay, if this is what you're testing, then we agree. This is, in fact, exactly what I would do. And we can set up a continuous integration server to run our test every single time we do stuff. Or once an hour, once every night, depending on how large your suite is and how long it will take to do. So traditionally, doing browser automation has really been a pain. It's cumbersome, it's brittle, and it's really ugly code, and it's nitty-gritty. No one really wants to do that. This is where I think GEB helps ease the pain. For GEB, any browser-based application can be tested. It doesn't even have to be one that we have made. So I'll show you a couple of examples of this in a little later on. It's programming language agnostic. And it really helps the readability of your programs, or your tests for your programs, and it helps you reuse components from other tests when you write more tests. So let's get into GEB. GEB was started back in 2009 by Luke Daly. By the time Luke Daly got interested in Redpack, he decided, and he moved to Australia, had a kid. Then he decided that, well, I'm going to focus on the Redpack stuff. I'm still going to help on GEB, but I need someone else to push this forward. So the current project lead is Martin Erdmann, who's based in London. But both Martin and Luke works at Gradle, so they do communicate. Martin is extremely active, especially if you sign up for the mailing list or you have questions. He's always answering. A lot of us other guys try to help with it, but he's the current guru. Why do we want to use GEB? Well, once we interact with stuff in the browser, we need to interact with some component. And GEB uses a jQuery-like selector syntax. So if you know a little CSS and a little jQuery, it's kind of easy to get a hold on what do we want to interact with. It's the power of WebDriver, but with the robustness of page object modeling. We use, of course, Groovy, and I think everyone here probably liked Groovy, otherwise they wouldn't be here. It integrates well with the build system, so you have Maven plugins, you have Gradle plugins, and the user documentation for GEB is in an open source project, the best documentation I have seen. It is very complete. So GEB is built on top of WebDriver, and WebDriver is also known as Selenium 2. Selenium was an old testing framework where it used JavaScript to interact with the browsers, which makes it kind of brittle. Everyone that has done a little bit of JavaScript knows if you try it in Internet Explorer, it'll definitely not work in everything else, and vice versa. Selenium, WebDriver is Selenium 0.2, which uses real browser native libraries to do the interaction. So there's an IE browser plugin, there's a Chrome driver, there's a Firefox driver. So each of these drivers handles all the nitty-gritty stuff underneath the hood, which makes it kind of stable, and it's also actively developed. With GEB, we can use either JUnit or we can use Spock or other test frameworks. My examples here are with Spock, but it works fine with JUnit. WebDriver, actively developed, so we're not really worried about that project. But if you try to write a WebDriver test where you use WebDriver directly, you'll find out that the API is kind of clumsy and it's really low level. You have to type a lot of code to do WebDriver tests. And being so low level, I don't consider it a complete solution for functional testing. So using GEB and Spock, this actually become our stack. So we have some kind of application, whatever that may be, and we use that through a browser. What we do is we use a test framework, Spock or JUnit, Cucumber, whatever, implement our test in GEB that uses WebDriver that interacts with the browser. So it's kind of a long stack, another layer of indirection, but GEB as a layer of indirection you really like because it hides a lot of ugly details from WebDriver and makes your test really readable. So how do we use GEB? The $ method in GEB returns a navigator object, and this is the method that we use to find the object on the page that we want to interact with. And the general format is you give it a CSS selector, you might give it an index or a range. So if you just select all div elements or all p elements, you come up with a list of those. You can say, give me the 0th element, so the first element, or a range of these elements, or just every one of these elements. And you can set up extra attributes or matchers. So I've brought a few samples. So if we want to match all the p elements, we just do $p, just like in jQuery. So this is not jQuery, it's GEB, but it's inspired heavily by jQuery So people that knows a little on web programming typically do know how to extract the most common elements in GEB. If you want to match the zeroth one, I just say comma 0, and I have it. I can match on titles, on the actual text in whatever element in the DOM I have, or I can match on div.main, where the div must have the class main. We even have the option to do regular expression. So if the text within the element should match something, where in this case GR8, well, then we can do that. Or you have some predicates that you can use. So starts with, contains. There's a range of these that you can look up in the documentation that make this kind of easy to understand. What is it for an element in the DOM that I'm looking for? So each of these returns a navigator object, and the navigator object, you can chain those. So once you have all the P elements, you can call the .find all the table elements that has cell spacing 0. So we're down to a little low level. You could also say, give me the parent of this element, give me the previous element, give me the next element, the siblings, the children. There's lots of methods to navigate in your DOM. If the underlying driver for the browser that you interact with supports CSS3, then you also have complex CSS3 queries like this. This is supported by GEB in extracting the element. So here it will be every second element except the first one of a table row. We can also retrieve information. So based on whatever tag we have, we can call the text method, and it will return us the text that is included, or what tag is it. So if I select .class, then I can extract, oh, this is in fact the class that I want. So is this an H1 tag with the class title or something? And you can extract the CSS classes using GEB once you do your test. If we want to interact with content, then we have different methods. So once you have selected something, you can call the .click method on it, and it's just like having a browser click that element. You can ask, is this displayed? If an element is not displayed, you're not allowed to click on it. So GEB works exactly like a user. Think of GEB as being the user for your program. So if an element is not displayed and you try to click it, GEB will throw an exception, because you as a user could not click that. You clicked an empty field in the DOM and nothing would happen. So it works in a fairly sane way with that. It has interaction, so if something comes out with a pop-up that says, oh, are you sure you want to do this? Then you can use the with confirm or with alert. We can send input. So this is based on the Selenium. So we can either do this just by left shifting the left shift operator, sending some keystrokes to whatever element that should be listening for them. Typically, this would be input elements. But it could be that there was some JavaScript that listens for key events, and then this would be triggered by inputting key events. We can also control click by using the keys class from Selenium below. It's entirely possible to interact with the WebDriver implementation down below through the Actions API. But given this is WebDriver, it becomes, again, quite tedious to do and quite verbose. So GEB has made an interact closure on top of this. So if I want to do control clicking, I can use the interact closure. I can say key down, the keys.control, type, click whatever I want, and then release my key. So exactly, you program GEB exactly like if you were the user. What would you do? I would type down the control key, I'll click on something, and I would release. If you want to simulate drag and drop, you can do this multiple ways. So you can, again, use the interact closure. you can use the click and hold on whatever element. It moves it by an offset. And in this case, it's 150 pixels to the right and 200 pixels downward. Then you release. So even if you don't know GEB at all, if you read this GEB spec, you kind of have a feeling on what's going on. It becomes very readable. Or even easier, you can use the drag and drop by, which kind of says what it does. When we interact with forms in GEB, so assume we have a form with just one input element, GEB does this even easier, so it has this shorthand notation where it just, on the form element, reference the property by the name that the input element has. And those are literally just shortcuts for finding the right element and dot value. So if you assign it, you give it the value as an argument, and if you test for it, well, you retrieve the value. You have some variables available for you. So the title is the title of the page. You have the browser, which is the underlying browser that you're trying to work with. On this browser, you can do different things. You can resize. You can set whatever position do you want it on in the screen. Should it be small, large? So if you want to test something that's scalable down to mobile devices, you'll tell the browser, please set the dimension to something that looks similar to either a tablet or a mobile phone. You have the current URL and the current window also as available. You can do uploading files, you can do downloading files, and we can do interaction with JavaScript. I have a couple of examples on the JavaScript later, and I have a little trick for downloading files also when we come to configuration in this talk. So let's try a standalone GEB script. I haven't talked anything about Grails yet, so if you're not a Grails user, this still applies to you. So let's try to go to a search engine, search for GR8 Conf India, click the first link, and hopefully end up on the right homepage. We assume that GR8 Conf India has been optimized to actually be the very first link that we click. Otherwise, we'll end up in some wrong direction. And how could this go? Well, this is all it takes. So we go to the duckduckgo.com. We could also have used Google, but I prefer something that doesn't track me quite as much, which advertisement, DuckDuckGo doesn't do. Then in the input that has name Q, I type in the value GR8 Conf India. Then I hit the enter key, and hit the enter key in a search engine, it searches for your results. Here, I say, well, let's wait for the links to be displayed. And the wait for closure says, wait for 10 seconds at most, check every 1 second. I've just added in a sleep here, and this is purely for demo reasons, so we can actually try to follow. Maybe the browser will start up on the wrong screen here. Once those 3 seconds are over, I take the H2 element that has class result __ title, go with the first one of those, and click it. Then I wait for the title, hopefully will become GR8 Conf India. So let's see if this at all will work. So I'm trying to run it from my editor. Oh, I would gladly run it from my editor. It takes a short moment to spin up. Yep, and it's right there. So we're in the 3-second waiting period. We click the first link, see the small gray thing, and we end up at GR8 Conf. So this is the very first demo I did on GEB, and it didn't fail miserably. So thank you, demo gods. I'll need your help a little later on too. All right, so we're at the GR8 Conf homepage there. We can shut that. Oh, not there. Yeah, it is definitely not optimized for this solution, resolution here. Let's immediately skip that. You can go to a list of the attendees page. So now I'm trying to do the mind of a tester. So what would we test in a greenfield scenario? We'll test, let's try to go to the list of the attendees, try to create a new attendee, I might type in some invalid data first, try to submit it, see, does this work? No, it should bring me back to the same page with a nice error message. I should update the right data, and then I should check if the data is then being updated once that happens. So, a little bit of Spock. When I do GEB test scenarios like this, me as a user, I want to make sure that the very first thing I do is go to this page is the first thing that happens. If I try to execute a step later down as the first step, things will of course fail because I'm not at that place in the process where I thought I would be. So this is where the stepwise annotation in Spock helps me. Stepwise, make sure that the test will be executed in the order that they are written, which means I can just write a scenario in my GEB specification. I extend GEB spec as the class. That's what tells GEB that we want to execute this as a functional spec. And then in that class, I can just write my Spock specification. So the very first one would say, well, go to the list page and check that I'm in the initial state. So I use the go method, go to attendee/index, just plain standard Grails, and I check that the title is attendee list. That should kind of do it. That's what I would do if I was a tester, see that I'm here. If the title is right, I assume that everything else is there too. Then I want to click on the new attendee button. So I find the link tag, the A that has the create class. Then I click it. Once I've done that, I want to make sure that the title of the page that I'm entering now should be create attendee. I can try to just submit the form, not having typed in anything. This, of course, wouldn't be valid. So I hope that I get back to the title page, create attendee. I should probably make some other checks that I get some error messages, but right now we're doing this the naive and unmaintainable way. So please do not do this at home. I will come back to show you how we do it the right way. So if I want to submit a form, I need to type in something, and this is where I use the shortcut, where I don't find the element and set a value. I just select those on the form and type in the name and the email. I click the right button, and I get to a page where I can see show attendee, and I can locate the information that I typed in, and I'm good to go there. Then if I want to edit the guy, I can do that. Oh, his name was actually Amit, and a different email, and things work properly. Once we've made a couple of these scenarios, we've hard-coded a lot of DOM elements into those. So I claim that there are some div elements with some specific classes and stuff. Once I've written a couple of tests, and my front-end guy says, oh, by the way, I restyled a lot here, so, oh, God, I have to update a shitload of test classes, and this will be me. So that really doesn't fly. So why am I then telling you this if I say this, we shouldn't do it? Well, it's because we have a solution. And the solution is to use pages and modules. So in one phrase, a page object is domain modeling. So we use the trusted principles of software engineering to do encapsulation and reuse. So a page object describes the URL that the page is on. How to check that we are in fact on the right place, that the content on the page is the right. And then we describe the content that is on that page that we want to interact with, and we can have helper methods. So at the attendee show page, I know that the URL is attendee/show. I know I'm at that if the title is show attendee. And I have some content here where at attendee property, I select every span that has the class property label. And then I know the name is the element that has the name as the label, and I go to the next, the item right after that, which is the input element. This is because I use the fields plugin, so there's no default class on the specific input element, so I just know that it's the one right after the label. If someone does some restructuring in all of my input fields, most likely this will still hold true. I updated these slides from back when I gave the presentation in Europe, and the Fields plugin has been updated, so the DOM that it creates had changed, which means that when I ran the naive way that I just showed you, this actually failed, whereas this, because something changed from a span to a div, this still worked. So if we do it this way, the content closure, yeah, you can have required elements, and you can have elements that show up at a later point in time using JavaScript that is not visible once you load it. If that's the case, you should use the required false. If you have required elements on your page that is not there, then GEB will complain and say, oh, wait a second, you told me that this element was on the page, and it's not there, so I'll raise an exception and say, there's something in your test that is wrong. Modules, just like page objects can describe a page, modules can describe repeated content either across pages or within the same page. So if we're within the same page, I can have the navigation bar module. On different pages, I have the navigation bar module. So I can include that on multiple different pages because I have the same navigation. The navigation, the modules, they require a base. So either I select it with a base, the one that's commented out, or if not, I set up a base inside the module. So the module, all it has is the content blob. And here I use a little trick that all the data is iterable, so I just give it an iterator, and I use data in the name, the email, the nationality, and all of these fields. So I can easily look up the data. If it's for repeated content, that is the wrong slide, sorry, I'll skip that one. You can use modules for repeated content. You can just use it as, for example, a row in a table, which is repeated. The documentation is fairly good on that spot. So if we do that, then we can go to the attendee list page, just say, give me all the attendees, make sure that one of the names of those is Bert Beckwith. So again, I would say a tester that does not know anything about Ruby code would still be able to read this and say, oh yeah, that's probably right. Will be updated. Okay, so how do we do it with Grails? Grails 2, you need to import the Selenium support if you, for example, want to set values in select boxes, and then you need to import the driver that you want to go with, and of course the GEB plugin. In Grails 2, you'll have the test as a functional phase, and that's kind of it. It works pretty much out of the box. Everyone should upgrade to Grails 3, so I'm going to spend a little more, a couple of minutes on that. So you should include the GEB plugin. It's when you do a standard Grails application, it's there by default, and it upgrades to the latest version. Once you just do a Grails create app, it comes with the HTML driver out of the box. It's a headless driver, so it doesn't assume you have any browser, it doesn't require anything. So it's good to get up and running, but you can't really see what happens, so I prefer not to use it. In older versions of Grails, they actually recommended that in a comment, but they've removed that in Grails 3.1. So you can do Grails create functional test, and it will create in the integration test folder a spec class for you that looks something like this. Test something, go to the home page, make sure the title is Grails. Someone should actually update this because this is not really GEB. This works in HTML unit because you can select the title of the page in this way, but it won't work in real browsers. So I need to send a pull request on this. We should just use the title attribute directly. We can interact, so in the beginning I mentioned white box testing versus gray box testing. So in white box testing, I don't do anything with the application. In gray box testing, I can go a little under the hood and actually wriggle with it. In Grails 2, you had to do this using the remote control plugin because the tests were run in 2 different JVMs. They didn't have any shared memory whatsoever. So using the remote control plugin, you can send a closure to fiddle around with the internal of the application. And the remote control plugin only works in test. So you don't send in something into production by accident. So you can safely use this. In Grails 3, this has become somewhat easier because the application is running in the same JVM. This means interaction is directly possible. You can import, you can use one of the service classes, or you can use GORM directly. So what we can do is we can say attendee.withNewTransaction, create 15 new attendees. Then I could go to the attendee index page, the list page there, and show that it actually has pagination now. We were not able to do that before because we only had 4. If I had to type in 15 new attendees, this would have been very tedious. So now I just immediately say to GORM in the application, create these new attendees.
This assumes that our build server is the same as the server that we are trying to test. If you are saying in Grails 3, it is on the same JVM.
Yes. So when you do Grails testing, using GEB for Grails testing, the framework will spin up a new instance with the application in test mode, and the test will run there. So if you run it on your continuous integration server, yes, then the application will run in the same JVM and on the same physical machine as it is, and that's what makes it work. You do have the option to use remote drivers using what are they called, source labs.
Actually, I was saying that suppose we have a particular environment that we want to test, and we have a build server separate from that.
Yeah.
In that case, it won't be in the same JVM.
Then it won't be in the same JVM. Then you need to use remote control to do it. But you need to make sure that the application you're testing is then spun up in the test environment and can accept closures using this. That would be a requirement for it to work. Okay, a short word because I'm running out of time on configuration and browser support. So configuration for GEB is placed in gebconfig.groovy. The file gebconfig.groovy that's on your class path is what GEB will look for. In Grails 3, I recommended to place it in source integration test/groovy, just plain there. That's the default place. You can see a lot in the manual on what can be accomplished, but it's important that you don't have any package in that, then it won't find it correctly. For the drivers, it's possible to configure which one you use, and you have a multitude of drivers available. Firefox comes as the easiest one to use because it doesn't require any downloads. It's just everything is contained in the Gradle line. Chrome requires a download, but it's really fast and very stable. There's an Internet Explorer plugin that, of course, requires some Windows stuff, so I'm not an expert on that, I must say. Same with Safari. There's a driver for it. I don't use the Mac that often. HTML unit and Phantom.js, those are headless. That makes them easier to run on a continuous integration server, but they are also a little more brittle and you're not exactly sure what you get because you don't see it. Once you run GEB, it spins up a browser, you can actually follow along in what happens. So what you need to do is you need to install the right driver, use the right browser driver for Selenium. For Firefox, this is the hack I told you on downloading files. Whenever you download files in browser, it always comes up with this magically, oh, so where do you want to save this file? That's a part that's not supported in WebDriver, which means GEB has no way of using support for that. So the way you can do that is make the little trick with Firefox that says, you don't have to ask, you just download. And then we'll place a folder here in temp that says, just dump the files down there, and then you can search for them out there. Did you actually download the right file? So you can do testing of downloads, but it requires Firefox and using it in this way. At least that's the way I have found it best to do. Otherwise, you can say oh, I want to maximize the instance of Firefox here, and that's one way of doing it. For Chrome, you need Chrome driver downloaded. You could do that manually and just have it in your /bin path, or we can actually set up GEB to do this automatically. So I have a little test snippet here that says, okay, depending on what operating system, you'll have to download the right binary. Then we can use an ant builder to says, oh, get me this file, dump it right here, unwrap it, and I know exactly where the browser is. And using Gradle, it only does this once. If the file exists, well, we don't do anything. This means I can use Chrome driver, and it's a little easier to configure, so I can set dimensions and sizes directly on the driver. And it's very stable, so I can recommend it as a driver. We can configure how GEB should wait. So by default, I can't remember the values. I always include them in my script to make sure that I know exactly what are they. So by default, the timeout here is 10, and I retry once every half second. The base navigator waiting and the @checking waiting, I recommend you to always have those true, because in case your application has a little hiccup, it takes a little time to load, your test won't fall apart from that. Your performance test should figure out what happened in that case, not your functional test, in my opinion. This means that if something is shown 3 seconds after page load, well, then we need to say wait for, because it's not initially there, but we want to allow our application to wait those 3 seconds before it comes out. A trick from Thomas Lin is doing GEB testing can somewhat be tedious. Sometimes something weird happens and you don't know what it exactly is. If you include this method here, it wraps a button in the top left-hand corner of your page that pauses GEB for at most 6 minutes. Then you can examine, what does this page actually look like? You can right-click, interact, say, oh, it has exactly this class, this is what it looks like. Then you can click the button and your test will run on. So it's a handy little method where you just call the pause method in your GEB test while you debug it. So I recommend putting the pause method in your base class that you then let that extend from GEB spec or GEB reporting spec, and you have it available everywhere. So I'm running very short on time, so I'm not going to do the demo of it. Come to me later if you want to see it. I'll gladly show it. Test report, nicely formatted like Spock. Use the power format. Nice trick. If you use GEB reporting spec, then at the start of a spec and at the end of the spec, it will do both a download of the HTML and it'll do a screenshot and place it in the report steer folder, which you must then have in your GEB config file. You can also use the report, give it a name. So anywhere you want a screenshot, you can do it. So you can use GEB for automatically do a series of images if that's the use case you want. So you can use GEB for other things than testing. And they're numbered in the right order. So for JavaScript, it's pretty much easy. You can do JavaScript executor, and you can execute the JavaScript as that. I typically wrap it in a JavaScript method